In 1964, the entire American automobile industry finally agreed on something, without ever holding a single meeting about it. For almost a decade, Detroit had been fighting the horsepower war with bigger and bigger full-size cars, heavier bodies, bigger engines, more chrome. And then, almost all at once, several manufacturers stumbled onto the same realization. The fastest way to win wasn't to keep adding weight. It was to take the biggest engine in the building and drop it into the smallest, lightest body that could physically hold it. By the end of this countdown, you'll know exactly which 10 American cars earned the right to be called the fastest of 1964, and why one of them, built almost by accident through a loophole in GM's own rulebook, would go on to define an entire era of American car culture. This isn't just a list of fast cars. This is a story of the year Detroit finally figured out the formula that would define the next decade. A big engine, a mid-sized body, and the marketing pitch aimed directly at young buyers instead of their fathers. Race-only Hemis banned before they even finished their first season. Factory drag cars with van seats and fiberglass fenders, and one car that broke GM's own displacement rules right out in the open and got away with it completely. Coming into 1964, General Motors had an internal corporate policy limiting engines in its mid-size, intermediate cars to no more than 330 cubic inches, a rule meant to keep GM's smaller cars from cannibalizing sales of its full-size performance flagships. Pontiac's John Devorian and a small group of engineers found a loophole. The rule only applied to standard equipment. If the big engine was sold as an option package rather than a factory-installed standard feature, the rule technically didn't apply. That loophole became the Pontiac GTO. At the same time, Chrysler unveiled a brand new racing engine, the 426 Hemi, built specifically to dominate NASCAR's high banks, only for the sanctioning body to ban it from competition again just one season later. Ford, meanwhile, decided its full-size Galaxy had gotten too heavy to win at the drag strip, and quietly built one of the most extreme factory race cars in American history to solve the problem. And underneath all of it, one of Detroit's most important homegrown ideas, General Motors' own Oldsmobile division building a hot V8-powered midsize car back in 1949, was about to come full circle. Let's start the countdown. Number 10 brings the letter series Chrysler 300 into its 10th model year, now built with a simpler, more conservative formula than the exotic cross-ram cars that had defined the series a few years earlier. The 1964 300K dropped the last of Chrysler's dramatic Ram induction hardware, offering the 413 cubic inch V8 with a single Carter 4-barrel carburetor as standard equipment, with a somewhat more powerful optional version available for buyers who wanted extra performance. It was a quieter, more comfortable interpretation of the letter series formula, still genuinely quick for a full-size luxury car, but clearly positioned as a grand tourer rather than a pure street racer. It's one of the final chapters in the letter series story, built in a year when the entire industry's attention was rapidly shifting away from full-size horsepower and towards something smaller, lighter, and considerably more affordable. Number 9 keeps Buick's Super Wildcat 425 rolling into its second model year, virtually unchanged from its acclaimed 1963 debut. The 1964 Riviera continued to offer the standard 401 cubic inch Wildcat V8 at 325 horsepower, with the optional Super Wildcat 425 cubic inch version, fitted with dual 4-barrel carburetors, still rated at 340 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque. Buick made only minor styling refinements for 1964, correctly betting that Bill Mitchell's original design was strong enough to not need major changes so soon. It remained one of the most respected personal luxury coupes in America, proof that genuine horsepower and genuine elegance weren't mutually exclusive, even as the rest of the industry's attention started drifting towards smaller, more affordable performance cars entirely. Number 8 brings Ford's factory drag racing formula over to Mercury in the form of a small batch of purpose-built Comet lightweights. Following the same basic approach that would soon produce the Fairlane Thunderbolt, Mercury and its outside partners built a small run of Comet coupes fitted with Ford's 427 cubic inch FE V8, an engine never intended to fit inside the compact Comet's engine bay, requiring extensive modifications to the front suspension and frame rails just to make it work. These cars were built almost exclusively for NHRA's factory experimental class, stripped of unnecessary weight in much the same fashion as their larger Ford stablemates. Built in genuinely tiny numbers and largely overshadowed by the more famous Fairlane Thunderbolt built the same year, the Comet Cyclone 427 lightweights remain one of the more obscure entries in Ford Motor Company's factory drag racing program. A reminder that Ford's total performance strategy extended well beyond its own showrooms and into Mercury's as well. Number 7 brings Chevrolet's legendary 409 into its fourth and, as it would turn out, final model year in the Impala. The 1964 Impala SS continued to offer the 409 cubic inch big block in its familiar states of tune, topping out with a dual 4-barrel version producing serious horsepower and torque for a full-size performance car. But even as it remained a genuinely quick machine, the writing was already on the wall. Chevrolet's own engineers were hard at work on an all-new big block for 1965, the 396, and the 409, immortalized forever by the Beach Boys just 2 years earlier, was quietly living out its last season atop Chevrolet's engine lineup. It's a fitting entry for this list, one of the defining engines of the early 1960s horsepower war, still fast, still respected, but already being overtaken by the industry's rapid shift toward mid-sized performance cars that didn't need a big, heavy body to carry a big engine around. Number 6 is a bittersweet entry. The final chapter of one of the most innovative American cars of the entire decade, built by a company that was already running out of time. Studebaker closed its historic South Bend, Indiana assembly plant in December of 1963, shifting remaining production north to a smaller facility in Hamilton, Ontario. The supercharged Avanti R2 and R3 packages, developed just 2 years earlier, continued into 1964 in dramatically reduced numbers, still capable of genuinely startling performance for a company that most of the industry had already written off. It's one of the more overlooked stories of 1964, a genuinely advanced, genuinely quick American car, built in its twilight months by a workforce that knew the end was coming, right as the rest of Detroit was discovering an entirely new formula for performance that Studebaker would never get the chance to try for itself. Number 5 belongs to Dodge's version of the single most dominant racing engine of the entire model year, the all-new 426 Hemi. Built exclusively for NASCAR Grand National competition and never sold as a street-legal option, the 426 Race Hemi combined Chrysler's classic hemispherical combustion chamber design with a raised deck height and cross-bolted main bearing caps built specifically to survive sustained high RPM racing. Dodge fielded its own Hemi-powered Polaras and 330s alongside Plymouth's more famous entries throughout the 1964 NASCAR season, part of a Chrysler Corporation sweep that left the rest of the industry scrambling to respond. The engine proved so completely dominant that NASCAR would ban it from competition entirely for the following season, forcing Chrysler to develop a genuine street-legal version before it could return to racing, a rule change that 2 years later would give birth to the legendary Street Hemi that muscle car enthusiasts still worship today. Before this countdown reaches its final 4 cars, it's worth pausing on the single rule that made almost everything else in this video possible. General Motors had an internal policy limiting the engines available in its mid-size intermediate cars to 330 cubic inches or less, a rule designed to protect sales of the company's larger, more expensive full-size performance models. Pontiac engineer John DeLorean and his team found the opening. The restriction technically applied only to engines installed as standard factory equipment. If a bigger engine was offered as a dealer-installed option package instead, it fell outside the rule entirely. That distinction, standard equipment versus optional package, is the entire reason the Pontiac GTO exists in the form it does. And once Oldsmobile saw exactly what Pontiac had gotten away with, it used precisely the same loophole to build its own answer just a few months later. Number 4 is Oldsmobile's direct answer to Pontiac's new mid-size performance formula, rushed to market midway through the model year. Introduced in April of 1964 as the B09 Police Apprehender and Pursuit package applied to the Cutlass and F85, the 442 took Oldsmobile's largest available mid-size engine, a 330 cubic inch V8, and added a high-lift camshaft, dual snorkel air cleaner, and reinforced valve springs, raising output to 310 horsepower and 355 pound-feet of torque. The name stood for its 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhaust. Road testers consistently praised the 442's handling, with more than a few calling it the best balanced mid-size car in the entire GM lineup that year. But a late introduction, confusing marketing, and a genuine horsepower deficit compared to the GTO limited first-year sales to just 2,999 cars. Proof that being second to market, even with a genuinely excellent car, came at a real cost in 1964. Number 3 belongs to the single most dominant NASCAR car of the entire model year, the Plymouth Belvedere, powered by Chrysler's brand new 426 race Hemi. At the 1964 Daytona 500, Richard Petty drove his Hemi-powered Belvedere to victory, leading 184 of the race's 200 laps, a Daytona 500 record that still stands today. Plymouths powered by the same engine took the first 3 finishing positions outright, a complete sweep that left Ford and General Motors scrambling to respond. Petty went on to claim the 1964 NASCAR championship, and the Hemi's dominance was so overwhelming across the entire season that NASCAR's sanctioning body ultimately banned the engine from competition the following year, since it had never been offered in any car the public could actually buy. It's one of the most consequential racing stories in this entire countdown, an engine built purely to win on Sunday, so dominant that it got itself banned within a single season, setting the stage for the legendary street-legal Hemi that would arrive 2 years later. Number 2 is Ford's most extreme factory drag car of the entire decade, the Fairlane Thunderbolt, built to solve a problem the full-size Galaxy simply couldn't fix. Ford's 427 cubic inch racing engine had proven dominant in NASCAR, but the full-size Galaxy body was simply too heavy to compete at the drag strip against Chrysler's lighter Max Wedge and Hemi cars. Ford's solution was to squeeze that same 427 cubic inch into the smaller, lighter Fairlane body, working with an outside contractor called Dearborn Steel Tubing to strip out sound deadening, heaters, and radios, swap in fiberglass front fenders, hood, and deck lid, replace the side glass with lightweight plexiglass, and even fit seats borrowed from Ford's own Econoline vans. The finished Thunderbolt weighed just over 3,200 pounds and was officially rated at 425 horsepower, though racers who competed against it estimated the real output at somewhere between 500 and 600 horsepower. Only 100 Thunderbolts were ever built, and a properly tuned example could run the quarter mile in the low 11-second range straight off the trailer, capturing the NHRA Superstock title and Manufacturers' Cup in its very first season. It remains one of the most purpose-built, uncompromising factory race cars ever sold to the American public, and it earned the number 2 spot on this list for proving, definitively, that a mid-size body was the future of factory drag racing. And that brings us to number 1, the car that didn't just top this year's countdown, but redefined what an entire generation of Americans expected from a fast car, the Pontiac GTO. Offered as an option package on the mid-size Tempest Le Mans, the GTO paired a full-size 389 cubic inch V8, borrowed straight from Pontiac's larger cars, with a standard 4-barrel carburetor rated at 325 horsepower, or an optional tri-power setup with 3 2-barrel Rochester carburetors, rated at 348 horsepower. A tri-power GTO could reach 60 miles an hour in under 6 seconds. Genuinely quick performance for a car priced well within reach of a young first-time buyer. Pontiac originally projected sales of around 5,000 units for the year. Instead, the GTO sold 32,450 examples in its very first model year, roughly 10 times more than Oldsmobile's competing 442. It wasn't the fastest car on this entire list. The Thunderbolt and the Hemi Belvedere could both outrun it in a straight line. But it was the car that proved a mid-sized body, a big engine, and a marketing campaign built specifically for young buyers could create an entirely new category almost overnight. Every muscle car built for the next decade, from the Chevelle SS to the Roadrunner to the Mustang's own performance variants, owes its basic formula to the car that earned the top spot on this list. So, what did all of this actually prove? That the fastest way to win the horsepower war was never simply building a bigger engine. It was putting that engine in the smallest, lightest body that could hold it. That a loophole in General Motors' own internal displacement rules, exploited by a handful of Pontiac engineers, created an entirely new category of American car almost by accident. And that an engine built purely to dominate NASCAR could be banned within a single season for being too good, only to return 2 years later as a legend every muscle car fan still recognizes by name. Every car on this list was building toward the same destination, whether its own engineers realized it yet or not. The muscle car era did not appear out of nowhere in 1964. It arrived that year, all at once, the moment Pontiac proved that a young buyer with a modest budget could walk into a dealership and drive out with a genuine performance car built specifically for them. Which 1964 American car would you bring back if you could only choose one? The category-defining Pontiac GTO? The ferocious Ford Thunderbolt? Or the NASCAR-dominating Hemi Belvedere? Did your father, your uncle, or a neighbor on your street own one of these cars? Write the name in the comments below.